So when you picture the 19th century, um, what usually comes to mind? Maybe those grand balls, elegant dresses.
Yeah, definitely. Or, that sense of old world charm, chivalry, almost like something out of a Jane Austen novel. It's a really compelling picture.
It is, isn't it? Like stepping into a perfectly staged historical drama.
Mm-hmm. But it's often a very curated image, one where, the messy everyday stuff gets kind of edited out, left on the cutting room floor, you could say.
Exactly. And that's where we want to go today. Forget the polite drawing room view for a bit.
Right.
We're going behind the scenes, really digging into the unvarnished reality of daily life for women back then.
And our main guide for this is a fantastic book, really direct, kind of funny actually, Unmentionable, The Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners.
Right. The author, Therese O'Neill,
Yeah.
she just cuts right through those romantic notions. It's quite a jolt sometimes.
It really is. Very myth-busting, sometimes startling, often amusing, but always, eye-opening.
So, fair warning, everyone. This isn't going to be a gentle tour. We're about to unpack some genuinely fascinating and, yeah, sometimes pretty uncomfortable truths about the past.
Okay, ready to dive in.
Let's do it. How about we start with something fundamental?
Mm.
Just getting dressed in the morning.
Okay. And right away, the contrast O'Neill draws is stark
Yeah.
between our 21st century focus on comfort and speed
Yeah, comfy clothes, quick grooming.
and what was expected then. She points out that basically most of us today would probably have been called a slattern.
A slattern. Just for wanting to be comfortable and quick. That's rough.
It essentially meant someone lazy, neglectful in their appearance. So yeah, a woman of means back then. Getting ready was a serious business, layers upon layers.
Right, a whole process. Talk us through it.
Well, it started with the chemise. Think of it like a simple slip or maybe a light nightgown.
Okay.
Then came the corset. And contrary to maybe what we always picture, it wasn't always about cinching the waist to an impossible size. O'Neill points out it often served a more supportive role, kind of like modern bras or shapewear, giving structure under the clothes.
Ah, okay. That makes a bit more sense. And then,
Then a corset cover, just to smooth things out. But then often, the next layer, especially mid-century, was the cage crinoline.
the hoop skirt.
Yeah.
That big cage-like thing.
Exactly. A lightweight frame worn around the hips, or sometimes even hanging from the shoulders, designed to push the skirt out into that massive, fashionable bell shape.
Which just sounds incredibly impractical.
Oh, completely. O'Neill jokes about how a strong gust of wind could flip it right over your head, and all that structure was just to hold up yards and yards of fabric, often quite heavy fabric, for the dress itself.
It's hard to even imagine moving around and all that.
Mm-hmm. And then, underneath all those voluminous layers, well, this might be a bit of a surprise.
Go on.
The underwear, specifically the drawers or bloomers, they frequently had no crotch.
Wait, what, like open?
Completely open. As O'Neill vividly puts it, a woman's nether regions were traveling unaccompanied.
Wow. Okay, why?
Well, the thinking was, with those incredibly heavy floor-length skirts that you almost never lifted, there wasn't much risk of accidental exposure, so the extra fabric of a closed crotch was seen as unnecessary.
Huh. Practical in a very specific kind of strange way. Though like O'Neill says, you do wonder about, well, managing certain times in the month.
Right. The logistics seem challenging. And speaking of logistics, just keeping all that fabric clean, that was another huge undertaking.
Well, I bet laundry day must have been intense.
Absolutely. It usually involved maids, hours of work, boiling water, harsh chemicals like lye that were terrible for the hands.
Why? Goodness.
Yeah. Even a fairly modest household might spend 2 full days just on washing. It really makes you appreciate, pushing a button on a machine.
It really, really does.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're dressed, finally, in our many possibly crotchless layers.
Yeah.
But what about the world outside? Let's talk hygiene and sanitation, which were pretty different.
That's putting it mildly. What's really striking is the lack of proper sewage treatment in cities.
How bad are we talking?
We're talking raw sewage, often just dumped straight into the nearest river, the Thames in London, the Seine in Paris, wherever.
And these rivers were,
Often the main source of drinking water for huge numbers of people.
oh my God. Seriously.
Seriously, the smell must have been unbelievable, but as O'Neill points out, the smell was the least of the problems.
Right, because disease.
Exactly. People were dying in droves from cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever, all directly linked to that contaminated water.
And they didn't make the connection.
Not widely, not for a long time. The dominant theory was miasma, bad air. They thought illness came from foul smells, not from, microscopic organisms in the water. Germ theory wasn't really understood yet.
So cleaning up smells was seen as the solution, not cleaning up the water itself.
Pretty much. Improving ventilation was big. O'Neill even jokes that if you were visiting someone, sticking to coffee or booze was probably safer because boiling or alcohol would kill the germs.
Good tip for time travelers. Okay, so what about personal waste disposal? When nature called?
Also quite different. You had outhouses, of course, basically just holes in the ground, maybe with a small shed over them.
Right.
Indoors, you might have chamber pots, or a bit fancier, a close stool, which was like a boxer chair with a lid hiding the pot inside.
Close stool. Okay.
And in grander places like castles, you had garter robes. These were little rooms or closets built into the wall, jutting out with just a hole in the floor leading down the outside wall.
Ah, the classic castle toilet.
Exactly. And O'Neill makes this hilarious, slightly disturbing connection to Disney princesses.
He does.
Yeah, suggesting that characters like Snow White or Cinderella probably used garter robes. And apparently, people sometimes hung clothes in them too, thinking the ammonia fumes would deter moths.
Okay, suddenly the fairy tale sparkle is fading slightly. Charming. And wiping. What did people use before toilet paper became common?
Well, hygienic paper started appearing later in the century, but wasn't instantly popular. So before that, or if you couldn't afford it, you used other things. Corn cobs were common in parts of America.
Soaked corn cobs, apparently.
Yes, or just torn up pages from newspapers or old catalogs. Definitely a far cry from quilted softness.
No kidding. Okay, what about washing the rest of the body? Bathing.
Also very different. Full baths, like immersing the whole body, were pretty infrequent.
Aye.
There was often a genuine fear that getting completely wet all at once could make you sick, especially with warm water, strangely enough.
So what did they do?
Sponge baths were much more common, often done yourself, with cold water, maybe some vinegar added. It was seen as invigorating, maybe more than just for cleaning.
Cold water and vinegar.
Yeah.
Sounds bracing.
And O'Neill mentions these warnings about not taking baths in warm rooms, believed it could lead to torpor, laziness, even masturbation or consumption.
Wow. Everything led to consumption, it seems. The richer ladies later on had more options, right?
Yes, towards the later part of the century, you see more specialized baths appearing for the wealthy. Foot baths, hip baths, eventually full immersion tubs, even early sorts of showers and douches.
Though douche didn't necessarily mean then what it often means now.
Right. It could just mean any stream of water directed at the body, often for therapeutic reasons, not specifically vaginal cleansing.
Got it. And hair washing.
Also infrequent. Grease, believe it or not, was sometimes used as a conditioner.
Grease, like animal fat.
Likely, yes. Or maybe pomades. Alternatives included things like honey or spirits mixed with rosemary, which, as Oneill points out, might just attract mosquitoes.
Oh, great. So perfumes were pretty essential then.
Absolutely. Often less about hygiene and more about masking odors. And you can imagine trying to keep white clothes looking white in that environment. Soot, mud, lack of effective cleaning agents.
Yeah, no wonder men wore a lot of dark colors and sturdy leather boots. Much more practical.
It really highlights how much our basic standards and understanding of hygiene have changed.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift gears to another very personal and often difficult topic. Menstruation.
Right. And this is an area where the gap between their reality and ours is just immense.
Totally. Just think about it. Queen Victoria herself, arguably the most powerful woman in the world, managing her period without any of the reliable stuff we have today.
It's quite something to consider. The options were rudimentary. Oneill lists quite a few.
Like what?
Things like wadded up raw cotton or sea sponges used internally, kind of like tampons.
Okay.
Homemade pads, often belted, made from folded cloths that had to be washed and reused. Sometimes just simple cloth triangles called clouts tied around the thighs.
Reusable cloths.
Yeah.
Washing those sounds grim.
Extremely difficult to get truly clean, you'd imagine. And then there's the wild mention of using a small albino marmoset.
Which, thankfully, Oneill clarifies is almost certainly not true.
Yes, probably just an outlandish rumor, but its inclusion kind of shows the desperation, maybe, and the lack of good solutions.
It does. And the phrase on the rag, where does that come from?
Oneill mentions a couple of possibilities. One theory is that women might have tried to hide bloody cloths by claiming they were just rags left over from jam-making season.
Ah, plausible deniability.
Exactly. Later in the century, things improved slightly. Commercial menstrual cloths and pads started appearing, often sold discreetly through mail-order catalogs. Waterproof aprons also came along to help protect clothing.
A step up, at least. But women were also getting a ton of advice, mostly from male doctors, about periods, right?
And it wasn't always helpful.
Often actively unhelpful, even harmful. The fear of cold water was huge.
Why cold water?
Many doctors believed getting chilled, especially drinking cold water or bathing in it, could drastically affect or even stop a period, which they thought was dangerous. Doctors like Pi Henry Chavas issued these dire warnings. Certain activities, foods, could make menstruation lethal.
Lethal, wow.
And the amount of flow is also obsessed over. Orson Squire Fowler, the phrenologist guy.
Him again.
Yep. He had this theory that if a woman didn't menstruate enough, she'd build up surplus albumin, leading to all sorts of diseases like tuberculosis.
That sounds completely backwards. It mostly was, and there was this particularly cruel idea floating around that difficult or unpleasant periods were basically a woman's own fault if she wasn't married.
How so?
It was seen as, like, nature itself showing disapproval of her unmarried state, punishing her for not fulfilling her biological destiny, essentially.
That's awful, just layering judgment onto discomfort.
It really reflects how society saw women primarily through the lens of marriage and childbearing. Anything else was unnatural.
The amount of misinformation women had to navigate about their own bodies is just staggering. Okay, shifting focus again, beauty standards. What was considered attractive back then?
Well, you hear fat was in fashion, but Oneill clarifies it wasn't necessarily about being overweight as we might think of it today. It was more about plumpness.
Plumpness meaning?
Signifying good health, vitality, youthfulness. Being very thin or gaunt was definitely not the ideal. Prominent cheekbones or a flat chest might suggest you were sickly or malnourished.
Interesting. So how did one achieve this desirable plumpness?
The advice varied wildly. Mrs. A. Walker suggested lots of rest, minimal activity to gain weight. Helen Jameson was maybe a bit more direct, advising overweight women simply not to wear tight clothes that emphasized it.
Practical, I guess.
Weight loss methods were often just as dubious as fad diets today. Oneill warns about miraculous fat reducers with questionable ingredients, and Fowler, well,
What can Fowler say?
he suggested, rather bluntly, that the best way for a larger woman to slim down was to get married and have children because nature abhors an empty room.
Right. Because having multiple children is famously slimming. That seems questionable logic.
Utterly counterintuitive. And for women deemed too thin, the goal was to fatten up, get those desirable fuller hips for childbirth, a more developed bust, what Oneill calls dugs.
How do they recommend doing that?
Often involved in activity. Helen Jameson advised 10 hours sleep a night on a firm mattress and a diet loaded with starches and sugars. Butter, rich milk, cream, desserts, pastries.
Sounds like the opposite of most modern diets. Okay, what about makeup? Cosmetics?
Ah, yes. A tricky subject back then. Makeup was often viewed with deep suspicion.
Why?
It was seen as dishonest, creating a false look of youth. And there was also this association with being sexually provocative, arousing men inappropriately.
But women still used it, presumably.
Of course, but often relying on products with completely unregulated, sometimes dangerous chemicals, rather than the tested stuff we have now.
So the natural beauty ideal clashed with reality.
Big time. And the pursuit of beauty could be genuinely dangerous. White lead, for example, was a common ingredient in face powders or enameling creams.
Lead?
Yes. Promised a smooth, youthful look, but carried a huge risk of lead poisoning.
That's terrifying. Any other scary treatments?
Oh, yes. Things like muriatic acid washes, deliberately causing blisters to renew skin, even intentionally getting sunburn to try and fade freckles.
Sunburned on purpose. Ouch.
And then there were arsenic wafers, taken internally for supposedly stellar complexion. The risks were immense.
Arsenic. It's amazing anyone survived.
The fear of wrinkles was intense, too. One remedy involved tying slices of raw beef to your face overnight.
Raw beef. Okay, that's something. And specific features, like breasts.
There was an ideal shape, the pineapple form. And yes, dangerous methods were marketed to try and achieve enlargement, various mammarial balms, even suction cup devices.
Good grief. And hair.
Long hair was crucial, seen as a key sign of femininity. It wasn't washed often, so brushing was vital to spread the natural oils, the grease.
Right, the grease conditioner.
Eyeliner existed, but was apparently very hard to apply well, and belladonna, a poison, was used as eye drops.
Belladonna. Why?
To dilate the pupils. Gave that wide-eyed, supposedly alluring, languishing look. Extremely dangerous, obviously.
It really sounds like the pursuit of beauty was a hazardous occupation.
It truly could be. It just shows the incredible pressure to conform to these often impossible, even harmful standards. Okay, shall we move into romance? Courtship, marriage.
Yes, the whole complicated dance, even simple things like carrying an umbrella or a parasol, had rules, right?
Absolutely. Apparently, sucking on the handle was a definite no-no. Seen as trying too hard, not very wife-like, according to one etiquette guide.
For sucking the handle, who does that? Okay.
The whole idea was that the woman was the prize. She shouldn't seem too interested or eager. Oneill uses this funny fishing analogy.
Oh yeah, the trout.
Exactly. The virtuous woman is the trout, just occasionally flashing her scales in the sun, then diving deep, waiting for the skilled fisherman, the suitor, with the best fake bugs, the proposal. The hook is matrimony.
It's quite the image. And fans. Weren't there secret fan languages?
That was the popular idea, yes. Though Oneill kind of pours cold water on it, suggesting a rapidly fluttering fan probably just meant she was bored or hot, not sending complex signals.
Uh-huh. Probably true. But modesty was key, right? No flirting.
Oh, absolutely paramount. Shame and modesty were huge virtues. Any hint of flirtation or getting too familiar before a formal engagement was scandalous could ruin your reputation.
So definitely no kissing or anything else before engagement.
Strictly forbidden. Kissing, touching, fondling, even prolonged hand-holding, completely off limits. Doing any of that marked you as shameless. And then you had the rise of scientific courtship.
Eugenics stuff.
Yeah, that early flawed idea about improving humanity through selective breeding, choosing a mate based on their supposed temperament, physical build, hoping for superior children.
How do they assess that?
Phrenology was sometimes used studying skull shapes, warnings against men with low, flat heads, for instance.
Reading bumps on the head to choose a husband.
And interestingly, physical ideals for women often favored ample chests and wider hips over tiny wasp waists. Not just looks, but seen as signs of good childbearing potential.
It all sounds very calculated. Less romance, more breeding stock selection.
It could definitely lean that way. And the alternative, not getting married, being a spinster, was really looked down upon, portrayed as being dead inside, unfulfilled, leading to a lonely end, according to Fowler anyway.
Grim. So the pressure to marry was intense. What about the wedding night itself? All that build-up.
High expectations, for sure. But the bride was supposed to approach it with extreme modesty, even ignorance. A fair creature full of trembling modesty, wondering what awaited her.
Sounds terrifying, frankly. Were husbands given any advice?
Yes, guidebooks often told husbands to be gentle, considerate. But there was also a profound lack of understanding about female sexuality. One doctor, Dr. English, described an unaroused vagina as lax and harsh and dry.
Not exactly setting the stage for mutual enjoyment.
No. And his descriptions of bad sex, painful positions no woman could want really show the disconnect between male assumptions and female reality.
And then came childbirth, also fraught with danger.
Hugely. Oneill contrasts the older, more hands-off approach with the growing medical interventions, like Queen Victoria using chloroform.
Which was controversial then, right?
Very. But even with doctors getting more involved, childbirth mortality rates remained shockingly high, and surviving childbirth could still leave women with serious, lifelong physical problems.
And having babies was seen as the goal, but also a burden.
A complex mix, presented as a woman's ultimate joy and purpose, but the reality of large families, the physical toll, it was immense. And birth control. Very limited option.
And frowned upon.
Strongly. Methods like withdrawal were condemned, often bizarrely linked to the evils of masturbation and supposedly causing health problems. The medical view of female pleasure was minimal. The clitoris often dismissed as just a puny vestigial penis.
Unbelievable.
Plus, huge religious objections, like from Fowler, and laws like the Comstock Law in the U.S. made it illegal to even distribute information about contraception.
So women had very little control.
Very little autonomy over their own bodies and family size. The idea of a woman choosing not to have children was often seen as selfish, unnatural. That Comstock Law really shut down access to information for decades.
It's a sobering picture.
Oh.
Okay, so after marriage, running the household, another minefield of rules.
Absolutely. And apparently one of the quickest ways to cause marital strife was just being messy.
Messy.
Yeah, the slovenly wife was a common warning. The wife who only dressed up to go out but was untidy at home. The horror.
Like the 19th century version of wearing sweatpants all day. Okay, and what about prostitution?
A harsh reality. Oneill doesn't romanticize it. Mostly young, poor women, forced into it by circumstance, often dying young from disease or hardship.
And STDs within marriage.
Often kept secret. Doctors might not even tell a wife if her husband gave her a venereal disease. Just treat her without explaining the cause.
Wow. Okay, back to the household. Running it was complex.
Incredibly. Etiquette governed everything. Even greeting guests wasn't simple. You needed the specific blend of welcoming but also regal and reserved. A tiny smile, no teeth showing,
No teeth.
and seating arrangements.
Oh, a major test of social hierarchy. Who sits where in the parlor was crucial. Get it wrong, major faux pas.
Sounds stressful. And servants were essential.
For any family with means, yes, a big status symbol. But the relationship was strictly hierarchical. Mistress above, servant below. Clear lines, absolute subservience expected.
No friendliness. Generally discouraged. Familiarity was frowned upon. Minor mistakes could lead to instant dismissal. There were even perceived differences between, say, American and English servants.
And dinner parties. The height of social life.
Pretty much. Huge emphasis on ceremony, often over practicality, elaborate table settings, rigid rules for how to eat every single course,
Right.
how to hold your spoon for soup, using specific forks for fish, how to deal with bread, cheese, fruit, and always served from the left.
Why the left?
Assumption that most guests and the server would be right-handed, so it was easier to serve from the left, leaving the guest's right hand free.
It sounds utterly exhausting just trying to remember it all.
It does, and that was just inside the home. Public behavior was under even more intense scrutiny. It's really dawning on me how even the simplest parts of a woman's day were just complicated and uncomfortable, even dangerous sometimes.
Yeah, it seems that way. So out in public, constant judgment.
Absolutely. Your dress, how you carried yourself, how you walked, everything was noted. And there were major restrictions on just being in public.
Like needing escorts.
Yes. A young married woman usually needed her husband or an aged lady, a chaperone. Unmarried women couldn't really even walk together without raising eyebrows. Might look like a roaming brothel gang, apparently.
Good heavens. And walking itself had rules.
Oh, loads. Not too fast, not too slow. Stand up straight, but don't look haughty. Arms moving naturally. Don't turn your head side to side too much. Definitely don't show your ankles.
Don't adjust your clothes in public.
Right. Don't wave or call out to friends across the street. Don't rush across roads.
All these little things could damage your reputation.
Easily. And behavior inside places like museums or libraries was also policed. Sit demurely. Don't talk too much or too loudly. No excessive animation.
And interacting with men.
Very carefully managed. Don't stop to chat on the street. If a man helps you, accept with just the right amount of a polite, brief gratitude. Knowing exactly when it was okay to take a man's arm was crucial.
It sounds like a minefield. And traveling alone.
Very risky. Predatory men were a real concern. Boarding houses could sometimes be fronts for brothels.
So what was the advice for women who had to travel solo?
Dress plainly, no jewelry, be quiet, dignified, avoid drawing attention. Only ask for help from strange men if absolutely necessary, and even then, very cautiously. It really shows how vulnerable women were considered in public spaces.
It really does. Okay, one last major topic we need to touch on. Hysteria.
Ah, yes, the infamous Victorian diagnosis applied to almost any female complaint that didn't fit the norm.
From just feeling down to, well, anything.
Pretty much refusing to get out of bed, hysteria, crying spells, hysteria, any kind of nervousness or emotional display could get slapped with that label.
And what did they think caused it?
All sorts of things. Dr. Kellogg blamed impure thoughts and too much luxury. He even bizarrely suggested women might be healthier if they lived more like enslaved women who he imagined had fine health.
That's incredibly offensive and wrong on so many levels. What about treatments?
Varied and often quite strange. Rest cures were popular, sometimes meaning total isolation. Massage, fresh air, specific diets, and hydrotherapy.
Water treatment.
Yes, things like pouring freezing cold water over the head and down the spine, supposedly therapeutic.
Sounds torture.
And then came electricity.
Ah, the early vibrators.
Yes, marketed to doctors for treating nervous disorders. But Oneill stresses the original intent wasn't genital stimulation. The prevailing medical belief was actually that masturbation or self-abuse was a major cause of hysteria and countless other problems.
Right, the anti-masturbation panic.
It was extreme. Fowler described it in almost apocalyptic terms. Kellogg listed pages of ailments supposedly caused by it, everything from acne and bad posture to insanity and consumption.
Consumption again?
Yep. Plus, strong religious condemnation, it was seen as a terrible sin. Challenging these dominant medical and moral views was incredibly difficult for women.
It's truly wild to look back on all this. This deep dive, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface, really.
I think so too. The sheer complexity of being a woman in the 19th century, it's vast.
And that contrast is so stark, isn't it? Between the romantic image we started with
Hmm. The grand balls and chivalry.
and the often harsh, uncomfortable, sometimes downright dangerous reality of just getting through the day. The clothes, the hygiene issues, the social straitjackets, the truly bizarre medical ideas.
It was a world away from those polite drawing rooms we imagine. Understanding it definitely gives you a new perspective on, well, on today. The privileges we have, but also maybe the challenges that still exist in different forms.
It really does make you appreciate things like, modern plumbing and medicine, and maybe question what progress still needs to happen.
And it leaves you with a thought, maybe for our listener. What are the unspoken rules and expectations of our time? The things we take for granted now. How will they look to people in the future?
That's a great question. What aspects of our 21st century daily lives will seem just as baffling or restrictive or strange to future generations?
It's definitely something to ponder.
Absolutely. And if folks want to explore this more, we can't recommend Unmentionable enough. And check out the other sources in our show notes too. There's so much more incredible and often unbelievable detail out there.